Wonderful to see everybody. As you know, my new format for the next few weeks is to do the introduction to the spiritual psychology of the Kabbalah on Shabbat mornings. That's going to go up on YouTube. It's also going to be a podcast so that when I teach the class, the spiritual psychology of the Kabbalah, I don't have to teach all of this. I consider to be very necessary introductory material. So that's going to be every Shabbat morning at 10:30 to about 11:15. And then we'll do a little pause. I can take questions, which might or might not be in the podcast. We'll definitely edit out the questions so I can just give the answer. Therefore, my discussion on the Parsha will be on Friday nights, and my discussion on the Parsha this Friday night will align very much with my Shabbat thought that I sent around this afternoon. It's also posted in the Jewish Journal and on my Facebook page. So this is called Torah portion Shemini. Shemini means eighth. And at the end of last week's Torah portion, the priests were put into a 7-day inauguration period for being priests. It's as if they had to be spiritually cleansed, probably even taught the rituals for the sacrificial offerings. Then on the 8th day, they come out of their seclusion, and the sacrificial system starts here. So if you look in Leviticus chapter 9, you'll see the actual very beginning of Israelite ritual religion. It's been discussed at great length up until this point. Leviticus chapter 9 is where it actually begins. The high point is after the last sacrifice. It says in chapter 9, verse 22, Aaron raised his hands toward the people and blessed them. Then he descended from having performed the sin offering, the elevation offering, and the peace offering. Moses and Aaron came to the tent of meeting. They went out and blessed the people, and the glory of Adonai appeared to the entire people. Now here, glory of Adonai probably means the mystical, immense, awesome, and holy divine presence. A fire went forth from before Adonai and consumed upon the altar the elevation offering, the fats. The people saw and sang glad song, and they fell upon their faces. They prostrated themselves in front of what they had just seen. And then something quite horrible happens in chapter 10. If you've never read this before, it's shocking, and every year when I go around and read it, it's shocking. Then it says, the sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, each took his fire pan. They put fire or some kind of incense mixture in the pan and placed incense upon it. And they brought before Adonai, and the Hebrew says, Vayakrivu lifnei Adonai esh zara asher lo tziva otam. They brought close to or sacrificed to God an esh zara, a strange or alien fire, which God had not commanded them. A fire came forth from before Adonai and consumed them, and they died before Adonai or in the presence of God. Now, this is quite a shocking story, and the commentators are really at a loss for what to say. Most commentators, and I include myself upon them up until a few years ago, would go to what happens next. First of all, the corpses of the burnt sons are taken outside the sanctuary. Moses says to Aaron and his remaining sons, don't leave your heads unshorn and do not rend your garments that you not die, and God become wrathful with the entire assembly. And your brethren, the entire house of Israel, shall bewail the conflagration. Do not leave the entrance of the tent, lest you die, for the oil of Adonai's anointment is upon you. Meaning they have been anointed for this holy purpose, and they can't break rule. They're still, as it were, establishing this communion before God and the people, even though this terrible thing had happened. Then in verse 9 it says, do not drink intoxicating wine, you and your sons, when you come into the tent of meeting, that you not die. This is an eternal decree for your generations, in order to distinguish between the sacred and profane, between the contaminated and the pure, to teach the children of Israel all the decrees that Adonai has spoken to them through Moses. So almost all commentators link up the intoxicating beverages prohibition to Nadav and Avihu, although the Torah doesn't say explicitly, the implication is they had become intoxicated. Their judgment was profoundly impaired. They made some terrible mistake when they made the incense mixture, and it blew up in their faces, and they were killed. It's a plausible explanation if you're looking for a plausible explanation. The problem with the explanation is the text doesn't say that. When it says they brought a strange fire before God, the implication, hold on, let me go back to the text. It says a fire came from Adonai and consumed them. The text does not say that the fire pan exploded. Biblical Hebrew is agile enough to say when something caught fire. So the problem with the explanation seems to say that the mixture was that bad and it exploded because maybe of an intoxicated state. But what the Bible says is a fire came from before God and incinerated the two sons. So I want to just give a few comments there. First of all, the reading that I'm giving you is an extremely uncomfortable reading. Meaning, if we just say they got something wrong with the mixture and God burned them, it leaves us very unsettled. And why is that? Because we are bringing a lens to the Bible, a lens that the rabbis give us, a lens that throughout Jewish literature and Christian literature, that in some way, and you'll excuse the expression, I'll deliver up on it in a moment, that we're listening to God's press agent. Now, the Talmud says God would never do anything unreasonable, such as burn these two sons for a mistake. Therefore, we have to look for some perfidy that they committed that would warrant the crime. So Rashi goes this route, the Midrash goes this route. So in a way, the Bible is telling us, don't pay attention to what you just read. And that's the lens that people bring. By the way, every interpretation I've ever read goes to a leadership issue and goes to the intoxication issue, as if to turn our gaze away from what has actually happened here. So as you know, I'm a strong proponent. I mean, I love the Midrash, I love the Talmud, I love the Kabbalah, I love the Hasidus. But one thing I recommend is that we actually look at what the Bible says, face our discomfort, face the fact that we don't like the Bible, face the fact that the God in the Bible is not recognizable to us as a God. So there's something very primal going on here, and I think we resist what I'm going to call that primal dimension in the Bible. Now, one reason I like to read it forthrightly is because part of what we're doing is we are, in a way, recovering archaic, ancient elements of the story that don't accord with the Bible's self-understanding that God is an ethical God, a righteous God who dispenses justice. That is the overall image of God that one receives. And then now and then, these narratives seep their way into the Bible, and we immediately want to explain them away. Now, here's the problem when we explain them away. What we can't see is Aaron, as I wrote about in my Shabbat thought. Every explanation that I've read says, let's go to the intoxication, let's go to the failure of leadership. That's where our attention is given. And as I read this story, I thought to myself, no one's discussing Aaron. No one's discussing that a father has just seen his two children killed, and with no explanation that can possibly be satisfied to a bereaved father. So as I was reading this, and this might just be a contrarian way of reading. I hope it's not only that. But part of me just wanted to listen to Aaron. Part of me wanted to be compassionate to Aaron. Part of me wanted to take his side and say, yeah, well, everybody else is explaining this. You just lost two children to something that is completely inexplicable, certainly unfair. And maybe there's some guilt on Aaron's part that if it is true that there is some misdeed, perhaps Aaron is feeling the inevitable parental guilt. I brought my children into this job and they weren't ready for it. So part of me wants to go with Aaron into that dark shadow of himself. But I also want to entertain what else might be on Aaron's mind. And the other thing might be on Aaron's mind when we go to the primal reading of this, before we have the explanation and the apologetics and the justifications, where Aaron says, as we see in the Bible, including the Haftorah for today, sometimes the divine has an outrageous side in the Bible that we can't make sense of. Now, another reason I want to press this point home is tomorrow morning when I discuss the spiritual psychology of Kabbalah, and I've been focusing on the Neoplatonic and Gnostic dimensions, stories like this tell us the Gnostic dimension of the divine is not something we like to think about when we read the Bible. I mean, there are many stories, especially the book of Job is the most disturbing exemplar. And once you look at the book of Job and you understand that, as Jack Miles says, God is a fiend in the book of Job, then you look at the Garden of Eden story, you see that there's a shadow to the Bible that's not being edited out. But one reason we don't see it is because of all the moralizing that goes on. So whenever I hear able educators, Christian and Jewish, discussing the Bible, they don't want to see God's shadow. They don't want to see the shadow in the Bible. As if my faith is the faith of the Bible. Now, I know I bring a lens to any religious text that I read, including the Bible, including the Kabbalah. At some deep level, the God that I experience is a God of grace and love and wisdom, is a healing God. It doesn't matter what text I am reading. If the text presents a different image of God, I'll just have to say that whoever wrote this text was not speaking to me. Whoever wrote this text has an understanding of God that for me fundamentally seems incorrect. Now, that's how I read the Bible. So I'm not relying on the Bible to teach me theology. Okay? So remember, for me, the Bible is not a book of theology, mainly because the theologies are so inconsistent. It's not a book about God because, as Jack Miles shows, there's at least 20 different personalities of God in the Bible. I don't need to make everything fit, and I can live with the discomfort, and I can live with, I'll say the last major point I want to make. If the Bible is about human experience, the existential quandary of human beings, we all experience life things that are profoundly unfair, that don't make any sense, that can't be explained away. So when people say to me, oh, there's a plan, I said, there is no plan. The ways of God are mysterious. I would say, there's no mystery here. If you're going to say that the reason for this horrendous suffering, there's some plan we can't see, then I hate the plan. If someone says, God works in mysterious ways, and I remember when I first spoke up, I'm not interested in this mystery. This is tragic, this is awful, this is evil, and I'm not going to explain it away. As you know, this is what led me into the Lurianic Kabbalah as the only theological system that makes sense. So what I want to advocate is reading the story as it says, and reading it not as about the divine, because again, I don't think the Bible is a reliable source of theology. It's about the experience that random, horrible, evil things happen in life, and not ask what God was doing, ask what happened to Aaron. Because Aaron is closer to us. We who lose loved ones, we who see unspeakable evil, what happens to our hearts? So from my perspective, I'm not interested in finding some kind of justification here. I'm interested in looking deep into Aaron's heart, because if I can understand Aaron's heart, I can understand my own, and I can understand your hearts. In fact, I mentioned in my Shabbat thought, a very painful pun. It says, Vayidom Aharon. Now, Vayidom can mean, and he was silent, but the Hebrew word Vayidom is connected to the Hebrew word dam, which means blood. And it's a very, very disturbing, almost perfect play on, a perfect demonic play on words, that he was bleeding silently. He was bleeding inside. His heart was broken. He wasn't allowed to talk about it. Moses said, don't talk about it. Don't mourn. You are in role. And I I have to tell you, I think of the many people I know, and some of you, I see your faces, who really have endured terrible suffering, either in your own life or with family. But at a certain point, you got to get up the next day and just suit up and show up. And nobody knows that you're bleeding inside. No one knows you're bleeding inside. So we're like Aaron, we're in role. We're not supposed to walk around and bleed on everybody. So we have to contain ourselves. But I know, as you know, that every single person is in some stage of mourning. Some utterly fresh, some having it somewhat worked through, some having it all the way through, and some of us never worked through. So I want to focus on Aaron, not on the intoxicating beverages, not on trying to justify God, not trying to blame these young men. I want to focus on the human condition of experiencing inexplicable, awful suffering and what we do with that suffering. Now, that being said, when I was preparing for tonight, I started looking at my different texts, waiting for someone to take this tack. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying I couldn't find it with my hour or so search. So I went back to one of my favorite interpretations of the Torah. Okay? So one of my favorite interpretations of the Torah is this book. It's a graphic novel. It's in Hebrew. I'll translate it. And it says, Lichiyot me'hatanach, to live according to the Bible. Okay? Now, this is a satirical, almost demonic graphic novel where God is depicted. See if we can get a close-up here. Not sure if we can do that. As the invisible man. Because God is indeed invisible. So, of course, he has a hat and glasses and a suit, but there's nothing there. And I'll just paraphrase the story. The story says, it was a regular day up in heaven, except for the fact that the sacrificial system was about to begin, and the angels could not wait to eat some meat. They had been waiting for this day for a very, very long time. Now, the priests also, they knew that they get a part of that offering. And they were saying, yeah, God, religion, that's all good. We really love God. We love the religion. But when we make the sacrifice, we get a little bit of this, and we are so hungry for some meat. So in the back, this is according to this book. So in the back of the mind of the priest, in the back of the mind of the angels is, we are so hungry. Okay? That's the setup. So then they come into the offering, and they make the offering. And a couple of angels arrive. As far as I know, they're anonymous angels. And the angel said, you didn't give enough for us. We want a little bit more of that. And Nadav and Abihu said, look, I gave you what you deserve. We got the measurements right. We're keeping this part. And the angel said, actually, it's not quite fair. You didn't divide it exactly right. If you have children, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We want a little bit more. And Nadav and Abihu said, actually, you got all that you want. And it says here, the argument escalated and escalated, began screaming at each other, and a fight broke out. Well, as you can imagine, the fight did not go very well for the humans, and they got beaten to death by the two angels. Okay? So this is according to this book. I didn't make it up. So when this happens, Moses and the Israelites come to God, and they say, what are we supposed to do with this? We can't just say they disappeared. No one's going to buy it. And so God says, so Moses says, we're going to have an investigation committee. We're going to have to find out what happened. But we're going to explain they died for security reasons. Now, this is a satirical hit at the state of Israel. If anything happens that we can't explain, just say it's secret and it's connected to a security issue. And then they decide, actually, it's not going to work. And God says it was a fashla, which means it was a major mess up. That's not exactly what fashla means, but I think I'm communicating the basic idea. And he says, here's what I got to do. I'm going to find the angels who did this, and I'll send them down to you. But I just want to tell you, the guys who did it were the angels of Jacob's ladder. The guys who did it were the angels who came and saved Isaac's life. So I'm going to send you those guys, and you do what you want. But you got to remember, this is a complicated thing. Those were basically good angels who had a very bad day. And so Moses, now Moses gets what it's like to be God. What am I going to do when angels have a bad day? this is one of the most humorous ways to explain the existential quandary, the tragedy of human existence. What do we do when angels have a bad day? So Moses and God are talking about the cover-up. So then they decide, how about if we blame Aaron and his sons? Okay, because everybody kind of likes Aaron, and we'll blame Aaron and his sons, and they're going to get away with it. So they say, it doesn't say here, but they came up with the cover story of the intoxicating beverages, which is actually a pretty brilliant little midrash. So where the intoxicating beverages thing come up, God and Moses put it in so to distract us from the fact that we had a couple of angels who just completely lost it. Good angels, Jacob Ladder kinds of angels, saving Isaac kind of angels, but even angels can have very, very bad days. So then the story ends with Hatzedek Na'asa. Justice was done, but not exactly. We ate the cake, but the cake stayed where it was, and we move on. By the way, I bought this book in 1990. I don't even know who the authors are, if they're still writing. This graphic novel takes some of the most difficult passages in the Bible, creates alternative behind-the-scenes stories that give a humorous take on the tragic dimensions of the human condition. So this is one of the most wonderful books of Midrash that I have in my library. And every now and then, when I can't find anything satisfying in my regular library, I pull out this book and I say, you guys really got it. In some poetic, satirical, ironic, smart alecky way, you guys dialed into the to this tragic aspect of the human condition. So my takeaway from all of this is really going to be pointed at people who say, there's an explanation for everything. The ways of God are mysterious. It all works out in the end. Now, that might be true, which means people who say it, they might actually be right. I just don't think they're right. And one thing I don't want people saying to me, if I suffer something horrible, I don't want anybody saying to me it was God's will. I don't want anybody saying to me that the ways of God are mysterious. I don't want anybody saying to me, who's smarter, you or God? I just don't want to hear it. I'd rather accept suffering, what suffering is. Sometimes suffering is random, inexplicable, and it's not the hand of God. And in my mind, it would be to suffer the indignities of life with some degree of dignity, and not try to be assuaged by someone giving an explanation that just doesn't stand up to the shredded heart that is oftentimes the human condition. All right, I'll conclude my talk here.